Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Okay, so tonight we continue with our series, and with the final session being on the final Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Right, so to look at the genealogy table, just to get a perspective of where he fits into the bigger picture, this genealogy table ran into many rows. So we started with Adam and Hawa right on the top, and we went down. And Ibrahim, we remember, had two sons. One was Ismail, which is number 8 on the left, and the other one was Ishaq. And Ishaq's progeny was many of the prophets going down till Isa alayhi salam. Then we move on to. Sorry, I have muted everybody. All right, then we move on to the 25th person in the line, which is Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. His parents were Abdullah and Amina, and his grandfather was Abdul Muttalib, and he was a descendant of Hashim and Abdul Manaf, and there were like 8 generations between him and Ismail above. What appears in yellow are all the ladies or the wives or the daughters that feature in any of these prophets' lives. And we won't go into all of that detail now because our focus will be on the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But suffice to say, these are 3 of his wives. He had a few more, and from these wives he had different children. Khadija bore him 4 female, 4 girls and 3 boys, and the boys all died in the infancy. And this is basically the bigger picture of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam as he fits into the genealogy table. Right, so he lived for a period of 63 years. We know for sure that he's buried in Medina under this green dome that's in the picture. He was born in Arabia, in Mecca, and we know that he had traveled up to Sham in Jerusalem in the Isra, the Mi'raj. But other than that, he stayed within Arabia itself mainly. Amazing thing about mentioning his name, either Muhammad or Ahmad in the Quran, it's only mentioned about 4 times, but many other incidents in his life, like the battles of Badr, Uhud, Ahzab, or the Trench, the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, other incidents were mentioned in the Quran where it relates to him and either his companions or his enemies or whatever. So there's a lot of other references in the Quran dotted or scattered all over the Quran. So he was a final prophet. What he stood in terms of how he appeared to be and how he was recognized, he was a noteworthy statesman, husband, father, leader, a role model in every dimension of life and for all times. Right? The impact he made on humanity is well recorded in many, many books. Some in Arabic and many translated into English, and today in possibly in every language of the world you'll probably find something written about him. Now he is mentioned by Michael Hart as number 1 in terms of his ranking of the 100 the most influential persons in history, and it's worth reading. Although we don't take, we don't maybe use that as the reason for him being the greatest prophet and greatest human being on earth. He came as a mercy to all mankind, to all of the worlds, and his life has been recorded in many, many biographies written. And his name is also mentioned in every adhan or call to prayer 5 times a day throughout all the mosques all over the world. And this honor has been only given to this prophet till the end of time. Now, his legacy was the unadulterated, unchanged, single version of the Quran, the living miracle for all times. And it's the only revelation that has been memorized fully, cover to cover, even by non-Arabic speaking Muslims. Now, this is quite an amazing miracle in itself, in that how can somebody who doesn't understand Arabic learn a book that's got over 600 pages and memorize it and read it, even though he or she doesn't understand it. It's quite an amazing miracle that the Quran has. Then we move on to his sunnah, which is his practices, emulated to the finest detail by devout Muslims all over the world. Islam is also one of the largest growing faiths in the world, and almost a quarter, 1 out of every 4 people on the planet Earth are Muslims. Just mute yourself. I thought I did mute everybody. Okay, this is a map that shows the main towns where he lived. So we start off with Makkah. And next to Makkah is Taif, where we know he went to preach and he was stoned. And then he came back with blood on his feet, and the people didn't accept Islam at the time. This was just before the Hijrah. We also know Aqaba is a place just outside of Makkah, nearby in Hudaybiyah. Aqaba was where the 3 pledges of people from Yathrib or Medina came to Makkah to listen to the Prophet and accepted Islam, went back to Medina and practiced it, and then came back the following year. So over 3 years, about 70, 80 people had actually come from Yathrib all the way to Makkah and converted and went back. So that's the importance of Aqaba. And Hudaybiyah, we know of that famous treaty that was signed between the Muslims of Medina and the Quraysh of Makkah, where essentially that treaty neutralized the enemy from Makkah, leaving the Prophet ﷺ free to deal with the enemy from within, which is in Medina, the Jews that were in Khaybar and the different tribes that were there, and causing lots of issues for the nascent and the growing Muslim community. Also, there were some tribes that were obviously not Muslim at the time, and they joined with the Jews and created a lot of turmoil and disruption. But with time, there were expeditions to Khaybar and all over, and the entire Medina area was consolidated before he passed away. Then we know Badr is south of Medina, which is the famous first battle in Islam after the Hijrah. Yeah, the Prophet was known to have traveled to Tabuk leading an army, and it was quite a long journey in the desert, and the Munafiqun were shown up for what they were. In other words, they professed to be Muslims, but they didn't really have Islam in their heart, and they didn't want to go with the Prophet, and they made all sorts of excuses to stay behind. In any case, the Prophet went with the remaining people, and they went to Tabuk to face the Byzantine Empire, the people that were there. But apparently, when they came to Tabuk, there was no army to face. So the Muslims simply preached in that area and then returned back to Medina safe. So it was really a test to show who the Munafiqun were and who the true Muslims were. Then we have Muta, which is another place further up. There was a famous battle there that was fought against the Romans, and this one, the Muslims were granted victory, even though they were smaller in number. Ajnadain, although I've put it there, but that was a city or place where a famous battle was fought during Hazrat Abu Bakr's period, just after the demise of the Prophet, where he took on the army of the Byzantine Empire. And in Jerusalem, we know this was in Laylatul Isra, the Mi'raj. It happened where miraculously the Prophet was transported from Makkah to Jerusalem and then onward to the 7 heavens, where he was given Salah as a gift, and that became the second pillar of Islam. As far as his other cities, Kufa, Hira, and Basra, he's not known to have gone there, but they were kind of established settlements in that vicinity as well. And then Yemen as well, he didn't actually go there, but there were delegations that came from Yemen. He even sent some of his Sahaba, Muadh ibn Jabal and others, to go and preach and teach there. And they were very successful with the people from Yemen, as well as the people from Iraq and Persia, because Islam had started spreading during the time towards the end of the Prophet's life in those vicinities as well, and it went over into Egypt as well. All right, so that's the map of his time during the 6th century. I just want to talk about 2 pictures here. This Canal Zubaydah, this is an amazing Waqf project done by one of the wives of Harun al-Rashid in around about the year 786 Christian era. So that's something like 150 years after the death of the Prophet. Now, Harun al-Rashid, Al-Amin, and Ma'mun, those were the 3 famous Abbasid Caliphs that ruled from Baghdad. That was the age of learning and discovery and all the different inventions and discoveries that were made in the Muslim world. But his wife, Zubaydah, she did something for the pilgrims, which was really amazing. She had this aqueduct or a water canal built, an open air one, from wherever a water source was, coming right all the way down to this place near Mina Muzdalifa. So when you do your ziyarat of Hajj Umrah, you normally go past this place, and they do show you this little remnants or relics of this canal that's still viewable, but is not in use. Right? But it's an amazing. Imagine she built it in 786, and we are now in 2024. So it's like maybe for about 1200 years, this canal was in use. Now it's not functional, but imagine the amount of water that serviced the Hujjaj that came from all over the world for drinking as well as wudu and other things. So Canal Zubaydah is an important landmark to visit. Then the other landmark is this railway station. During the Ottoman rule, and you know the Ottomans, the rule terminated in about 1914, just prior to World War One, and they had built this railway station in Medina. This is the last remnants of that railway station. You can see the railway lines just in front here, and there are some railway lines behind this thing. So this was the station that connected Medina to Damascus by rail. So again, it facilitated the movement of the pilgrims from the Turkish, the where what's written as Byzantine Empire, which Turkey is and Istanbul is out there. From all the way from Istanbul, people could travel via Damascus, and obviously Beirut and Jerusalem also connected, and then they travel all the way down to Medina using this railway. It's unfortunate that today they don't use this railway station, although they've got other railways in Arabia at the moment. Okay, we then move on to his life itself. So I've summarized it in 2 slides. And there's a lot that happened in these 2 slides, so I won't go into details now, but I think you can read about most of these things on your own. I think significantly he was born in the year of the elephant when Abraha tried to damage or destroy the Kaaba. Then he grew up as a merchant. He married Khadija at the age of 25, and at the age of 40, he received the first revelation and became a prophet officially. So his early life of the first 40 years were like kind of, for lack of a better word, trouble-free, carefree. He had a very pleasant, tranquil life. But after the revelation came, and then he was told that he must now start teaching the people in Makkah, teach them to leave idolatry and come into monotheism and give the dawah and do it publicly as well. Climb onto Mount Safa, which is a little hillock next to the Kaaba, and invite the people to Islam, tell them what it is about. And obviously, a lot of people didn't want to even hear this message, and there was a handful that actually accepted Islam. But you find that after the dawah phase started, Islam did grow, and it grew with some significant people like Hazrat Umar and Abu Bakr and Ali, all of the first Sahabas, as well as his wife Khadija. And as it grew in numbers, that's when the Mushrikeen decided that, you know what, let's try and use bribery as a way of getting him to denounce Islam and stay on the way of ours, which was the Mushrikeen or the idol worship kind of way. That didn't work. They offered him all the great things, which is to make him king or leader of the tribe. They gave him all the wealth down and said, we can make you the most wealthy person in Arabia, and we have beautiful women. You can marry the one you like, and even have whichever woman you'd like. But none of those tactics work. Then later on, persecution begins, where there was verbal persecution, then there was physical. Sometimes they would throw the entrails of a camel on top of his back while he's reading Salah in front of the Kaaba. Then became the hard, tough years, which is a social and economic boycott. And the Muslims were imprisoned in their homes. Nobody was dealing with them, trading with them, giving them food, nothing. They were just, and it came to such a hard point where Muslims at that time started eating roots and barks of trees and branches and leaves just because they didn't have food. So there was like a food boycott and everything on the Muslims way. All the tribes that were in the area of Makkah decided jointly that they're not going to deal with the Muslims. So they really isolated them, insulated them, and applied the boycotts to a horrible extent. During this period, Khadija, his wife, and Abu Talib, his uncle, they both passed away. They were two pillars of support. He then decides to go to Taif. There also his call is rejected. Then Allah gave him a gift. They blessed him with Miraj, which is the night visit to the seven heavens, and the 5 daily prayers were ordained. And then slowly but surely the tide started changing, where there was a delegation of 6 that came from Medina to embrace Islam. The next year it was about 12 or 18, and in the third year there were about 72 people. So the first 70, 80, 90 people actually came from Yathrib or Medina. And then obviously then the command came, leave Makkah, leave all your belongings, your houses, whatever, get onto a camel or walk, whatever, and leave Makkah and go to Medina. So the command of fighting against your mushrikun enemies was not given. So war was not permitted at this time. So peacefully, the Muslims, wherever they were told to leave. At this time, they were also, just before this, there was a first hijrah to Abyssinia, where the King Negus of Abyssinia accepted the Muslims. They lived there, and they lived there many years, side by side with the Christians, and there was a good understanding amongst them. And they were really grateful for this kind of, you know, place that they were given at least as a safeguard. Right, then we move on to the post-Hijrah period, the last 10 years of his life. The Masjid al-Nabawi is built, the fasting and zakah became prescribed, and the famous 3 battles were fought. The Qibla was changed from Al-Quds in Jerusalem to Makkah. And this last battle of Ahzab was a very big one. It was confederates, meaning it was a confederation of all the tribes of Makkah together with those in Medina and the Jews. They all formed like an entity to fight against this group of Muslims that were, enclosed in one part of Medina. And obviously the Battle of the Ditch or the Battle of the Trench or the Battle of the Confederates occurred in this year. And after about 1 month of trying to, cross that trench and defeat the Muslims, Allah caused a storm to come up, and the tents were blown away, the animals ran away, and the Mushrikun from Makkah were just forced to leave without even fighting, as it were, in that particular war. And that was the last major battle or confrontation between the Mushrikun of Makkah and the Muslims. Right, then during when on the 6th year of the Hijrah, about 1,400 companions went to the Prophet with the intention of performing Umrah, but they were refused entry. And the Hudaybiyah peace treaty was signed, which on face value it looked like it was against the Muslims, but in reality there was wisdom in the way the clauses were divinely ordained, and it became a victory for Muslims. Then neighboring rulers were invited to Islam. The Meccans, they broke the Hudaybiyah treaty, and then the Prophet was then allowed to enter Makkah triumphantly with the Idha Jaa Nasrullah al-Fath, being guaranteed that your entry will be without any bloodshed, and you'll enter in Makkah in your numbers, and you'll be able to clean up the precincts of the Kaaba from all the idols and restore monotheism the way it was during Ibrahim's time, some 2,000 years prior. So this was the very big thing, and then there was an expedition to Tabuk, the last pilgrimage, Arafat, Saman, and then obviously his death and burial in Medina at the age of 63. So here we look at maybe like a heat map of his life. The first 40 years were very calm. The next 6 years were but turbulent, where there was bribery and offers made. Then the last 3 years, which are the boycott years, which are the most difficult years, it was like, fighting, being not fighting so much, but, absorbing as much, pain that you could actually think of, starving and the rest of it. Then we have the Hijrah, and then the first 4 years were also tough years in the sense that there were 3 major battles fought. In 2 of them, they were outright victorious as Muslims. In the Battle of Uhud, they suffered a bit of a backlash, and a lot of Shuhada also died in that particular one due to them not following the commands given to watch that little hillock that surrounded the Mount of Uhud. All right, so this is essentially the heat map to show you his life. And the last 3 years were very sort of years in which culmination of the message happened, and people entered Islam in their throes. Okay, then we move on to, sometimes we as Muslims, some people go by the form rather than the spirit of what the man stood for. So we'll go for maybe how he dressed and how long his beard was and the rest, and how he looked and all the rest of it. But we forget sometimes the actual heart of what he was. I've identified him in these three columns: one as a human being, second as a father, and the third as a leader. Now, obviously, you can do this in any way that you like, but you come across so many of these like categories that you can, if you want to like box him into certain things. But I just did these few, right? And in each of them, I just identified about 11 like qualities or sifat or character traits that he had. If you look at the first column, he showed compassion to everything, all human beings, insects, plants, animals, nature. He was truthful in what he did in all his dealings, to such an extent that even before he was given the message of Islam, the Quran, he was given these two nicknames: Al-Amin, meaning the trustworthy, and As-Siddiq, meaning the most honest one. Now imagine somebody who's not even yet, uh, you know, uh, like a Muslim per se, has got these qualities already inherent in his nature. So obviously he's a man of standing, and he had good qualities and goodness in him all the way through since the time he was born, actually. He had also humility, simplicity. He was very kind, very forgiving. He practiced equality in how he treated people around him. He was also highly abstinent. He used to fast regularly every Mondays and Thursdays and even more. And he used to stand up in prayer for sometimes one third, sometimes two-thirds of the night. And he showed general respect for everybody. As far as how he was as a father, and he had multiple wives and multiple children, his treatment to his wives were all on an equal basis, which is a very hard act to follow. His treatment of children was also an equitable one. He maintained family ties. He divided his time between his his preaching and teaching as a prophet, his teaching at the Baitul Arqam, to the rest of the Sahabas, and then obviously his family as well. So everybody had a portion of his time dedicated to them. He used to build many bridges. He was a very good negotiator, a peacemaker. You remember that one time in Makkah when they had a flood and the black stone had moved. So the tribes were all fighting as to who's going to put the stone back. And they said, well, let's leave it to like the Almighty to decide. And whoever comes first tomorrow to the Kaaba will let him do it for us. And it so happened the Prophet Muhammad happened to be there. And what he did is he took the stone, put it on a big sort of cloth or something, and he asked all the tribal leaders to hold one part of the cloth and bring the stone back to where it should be placed in that one corner of the Kaaba. So he did it in a very peaceful way, which all the tribes were like equally happy about the fact that everybody had a share in doing this noble work of bringing the black stone back to its place. Right, his wives all talk of him as him being the paragon of excellence and a living, walking Quran. So, in other words, whatever the Quran taught as principles, he followed in his life. Then we look on the leader side. He was a very strategic thinker. He used to do mashwara or consult with his sahabas on all major things, like, for instance, in the Battle of the Trench, he asked us, people, and Salman Farsi came with the idea of building a trench around the city, which actually worked for them and it happened. And then today in leadership literature, we find these three terms coming up very often: to be a transformational leader, a servant leader, in other words, servant of the people, although you're the leader on top, and also very democratic in the way you take decisions. He was divinely guided. He had a magnetic persona. People just saw him and sometimes just fell in love with him and accepted his message. Uh, Also, he rolled up his sleeves. So when there was work to be done, he didn't, hide away somewhere. He actually put his, shoulder to the wheel, like in the Battle of Trench. There's a famous incident that he was with the Sahabas in the line where they were digging the trench. And the trench was quite deep. It was over 2, 3 meters deep and about 3 meters wide or something. So it was quite a deep trench. And also, if you look at the dolomitic kind of the rocks that were in the area, it was very hard to actually dig that particular trench. And it so happened that one Sahabi came very hungry and he was part of the people digging the trench. And he said, "Ya Rasulullah, I want to show you something." He lifted up his little shirt and he showed him that, you know what, I haven't eaten. I got this one rock tied onto my belly just to keep the pangs of hunger away from me. So the Prophet listened to him and then he said, "You know what, all right, let me show you something." And he lifted up his garment and he said, "I've got two rocks and I'm also hungry." And one other Sahabi heard this and he said, "Let me go to my wife and quietly and see if we can't at least give these people food." So he asked his wife, "Have you got anything to feed the Prophet? So if you know, like three, four people, if I invite them." So she said, "You know, we've got one last piece of meat or whatever. I'll cook it and you can call him. No problem." So he went back, invited the Prophet, and the Prophet said, "You know what? He invited." The narration goes to, I don't know, it was 50 or 100. I don't know. It was quite a big number of people to come and eat at this Sahabi's house where there was a small pot of food boiling and ready to eat. And it so happened that the Prophet said, "You know what? There'll be enough food for everybody." He opened the pot himself and he dished out. And you won't believe everybody was fed and they were all happy that at least they got food from the Prophet's hands. And this was one of the miracles that the Prophet ﷺ had in his life. He did, there was a lot of other miracles like these, you know, minor ones in comparison to what the Quran is, obviously, but that's the main he was. He was a very good listener. And also the last one, military commander in chief. So in other words, whenever there was a battle to be fought, he would be right there in the front. He won't go and hide in one military bunker underground, you know, which is soundproof and you know, today how people sort of fight wars is they make sure they've got their bunkers built and then they allow their men and soldiers to go and fight in the war and get killed. But if there's lo and behold, if there's you know, an atomic attack, then these leaders will go quickly into their bunkers and be safe, and they'll be alive, or maybe, because you know sometimes you're in these bunkers, you can be killed because Allah can send out a punishment that can swallow a bunker into the ether. So, in any case, he led from the front. He was a commander in chief. So these qualities of being transformational, servant, and democratic was he lived it. Right? All right, so this is, in a nutshell, a summary of the greatness of the man. And to put these qualities in another way, this is another quotation or sort of kind of, you know, the Sunnah that I found very, very appealing, where it talks or it describes how he used to talk, how he used to walk, how he used to eat, how he used to breathe, sleep, dress, work, think, behave, learn, spend, sacrifice, worship, serve parents, respect. Everything he did was done in a very gentle, humane way. So ideally, when we want to follow the practice or the sunnah of the Prophet, this is what we should be doing, emulating all these, not only this philosophy, but in practice, make these qualities come alive in us. And then we will be practicing the Sunnah in all its dimensions. Okay, we then move on to the Prophet's final sermon on Mount Arafat a year before he died. He delivered this famous first recorded charter on human rights. Now, I just put two bullets down, which is he abolished femicide because that's what was happening at the time, that all baby girls were buried alive because the Arab tribes felt that boy babies would keep their family name, but girl babies were like a liability, and out of not only fear, but it was almost an embarrassment to have a girl child as a daughter in the house. They would actually take the child, innocent, beautiful, dig a little hole and bury the child alive. I mean, this is mind-boggling that this is, you know, the kind of things that the Arabs of the day did in Jahiliyyah. Right? They also practiced racism that you can't dream of. I mean, they had slavery at the time. They even looked at people that are of darker skin and fairer skin, and it all created racism. And obviously, they believed in the supremacy of their tribe. In other words, the Banu Quraysh were better than the Banu this or Banu that. So they believed in their tribal superiority. They even had poets to aggrandize their achievements in life and all of this. So the society was entrenched in all these killings and racism and tribalism, and for a small short period of 23 years, Prophet ﷺ was able to eradicate all these three diseases of humanity which are prevalent even up to today. Right? And then another element of this final charter was the fact that there's no superiority of an Arab over non-Arab. There's no superior white over black, and everybody's a brother or sister in terms of the brotherhood of people, and everything has to be respected. You respect others, and they must respect you, and you take only what's given to you, and freely and willingly, and don't do injustice of any sort. Right. So this is the essence of that final Arafat sermon that he gave. And if you want to the detail, this is on many websites. You can read the fine print yourself. But everything here is truly amazing. What he preached and practiced as a charter for all times. Right. So this you can do on your own. Right. So the final thing I want to round off with is there's 3 verses in Surah Al-An'am which relate to the Ten Commandments as well. And if you look at it, this is essentially what all the prophets came with. It's the same message. The first thing is do not associate others with Allah in worship. In other words, monotheism is at the heart or core of everything. And obviously, by extension, you're opposing all forms of idolatry. The second thing is about honor your parents, right? Respect and care for parents, no matter what their age. Third one, do not kill your children for fear of poverty, right? We provide, we are the sustainers, the rob, and respect life. And the next one was do not come near indecencies, whether it's openly or secretly. So shun all evil as well as the temptations that go with it. Now, if you look on the side, we did look at these 10 commandments before, so I won't go through it in detail, but you can see the parallels in the two sides. Then the next verse carries on. It says, do not take a human life except with legal right. In other words, murder must be avoided at all costs, right? But just wars like jihad, where there's a just reason for that war to be fought, then obviously it's permitted. Do not come near the wealth of the orphan unless intending to enhance it. In other words, if you're going to add value to the orphan's inheritance, then by all means do that in, investment or whatever. But don't take chances with the orphan's money if you are a trustee of a person that's an orphan, because you're going to be answerable of how you manage that wealth that was an amana or the trust in your hands, right? And so look after not only orphans, but even the widows. Protect everybody's inheritance money, their property, their well-being, give them what is due on time and in full at maturity. The other one was about give full measure and weigh with justice. Be just in all your dealings, financial, trade, keep away from interest, usury, and be fair in everything you do. So here again, you can see the link between the 10 commandments, right? And then the last part of this 3 verses say, we never require any soul more than what it can afford. In other words, whatever you can do, that's the kind of load you have been assigned. In other words, you need to deal with life stresses, and everything that you've been given on your shoulders is something that a human being can withstand and can do. Now, sometimes we feel, I mean, there are people that are like suicidal in their nature because they think, the whole world's problems are on their shoulders. But I read one interesting quotation that said one day that said something to the effect that all the world's problems that are carried by everybody is put together and made into one like mountain, and then everybody was told that from that mountain now, if there's a billion people, take 1 billionth share of that mountain and put it on your shoulders. They say most people will actually be happier to deal with the stresses they had before they started sharing it on the mountain. So in other words, even though it looks like it's not handle you can't handle it and all of this, but knows what your strengths are, and sometimes your stress is actually is a challenge for you and like a test for you, and you must come out on the other side stronger. Right, the next one is when you speak, maintain justice, even when you're dealing with close relatives and friends. You must stand firm, speak truth to power. And Allah is actually, by us submitting to Islam and saying we are Muslims, we are coming into a covenant with Allah. Like the Jews had a covenant with Musa and Allah. This is what we are also, that fulfill all the contracts you've made in life, the promises you made, and keep to your word. Be honest. Right? And finally, it says, this is my path. It's a Sirat al-Mustaqim. Follow it. And if you don't, obviously, you can go your own way, but then you will be separated totally from his way, and Jannah will definitely not be for you. So Surah Fatiha encapsulates this thing about be on the right course, follow the middle course, avoid temptations and evil company. Okay, then we look at just another summary from another angle. If you look at all the 25 prophets, now I won't go into each one in detail, but you know, essentially the same message was given to all 25 of them. They just had different audiences or different people or communities that they went to and preached and taught over the centuries. And the oppression against the prophets was of various degrees of severity. Some people really were tested to the limit, and some prophets had it a bit lighter. Right, and all prophets also had personal challenges, like for instance, within their family, sometimes their wives, I mean, they were preaching to the community, but their very wives were not Muslim. They didn't accept the message that the prophet husband of theirs was giving to the people. And we know of Nuh alayhi salam and Lut alayhi salam's wives, they were of that type. They were sort of vanquished or, dealt with in the azab or the punishments that came on them. Then also, these same prophets had children also of varying types. Some were pious, some were not. There was a rivalry between sons. If you look at Yusuf, Binyamin, and all the other 10 sons, or even Cain and Abel, the first two of Adam alayhi salam, one killed the other. So there was all these kind of family politics and family rivalries and all that going on, even in the prophet's own households. Also, then they had to deal with tribalism and racism in terms of the tribes and the people they went to. They even sometimes have personal health issues, like Ayyub alayhi salam. Remember how sick he became and how he lost everything. And later on in life, his fortunes changed, but much, much later after really suffering a lot. So the prophets were tested and they showed patience and forbearance at various levels. Then we look at the kind of people these prophets went to. They all were interested essentially about power, control, influence, and wealth. Right? And they didn't want to relinquish their status. They're high and mighty, and the fact that they were pharaohs or whoever, they were kings, and they had all that, and they had all the power, and they had all the wealth, and they didn't want the prophets to tell them how to spend their wealth, like Shuaib alayhi salam's time. So essentially, they didn't want to give up their privilege, because what all these prophets came with was to go against, you know, reminding people that, power, control, and wealth and all that actually belongs to God. No one else has it as much as Allah has it. And all of you are mere small, you know, pawns in this whole big game of the universe. And don't think that you have it, because you don't actually have anything, no matter how rich you are. Right? So this is what the prophets came to preach against. Then they also had their old traditional ways, customary beliefs, ways. They resisted change. And they were essentially like frogs in slow boiling water. We talked about this analogy earlier, right? So they were kind of set in their ways, in their beliefs, and they didn't want anybody to rock the boat. So when the prophet came and told them something else, they opposed it. Then what they went on forward is they called some prophets liars, some of them magicians, poets, mad, possessed by jinn. And they even questioned, why wasn't this message brought by somebody else besides you, as the prophet sent to them? Why wasn't an angel sent? Now, again, if an angels were sent, then Allah says in the Quran somewhere else that how would you believe in something that you can't even see properly and you don't even know who's an angel and who's not an angel? Right? And the other problem they had is, why did Allah sort of choose sort of lay people, the poor people of the community to become prophets? Why didn't they choose like the elites from our ranks, the chief of the tribe or the king of community? Why didn't he do that? Now they question even that, and obviously we know why that is so, because the elites of the day were the ones in charge of power and control and influence, and well, they wouldn't have actually really want to preach, because that's what they wanted in their lives. Then also they went further. They made their prophets' lives unbearable. They mocked them, humiliated them, got black magic done on them, cursed them, boycotted them, wanted to stone them, and the list carries on. On the next page, they even wanted to throw them out of societies. They made them, immigrants, their homes. They disowned them. They forced them to migrate. They tried to burn them. They crucified them. This is the legacy of all the prophets. These are the things they did to these prophets. Right? Such noble people with such a good and humble personalities, with a nice message, but this is the kind of torture they inflicted on the prophets. And the prophets, on the other side, they had to speak up against the power, establish new principles, usher in a new world order. Obviously, they tried to bribe and tempt them with leadership positions, wealth, women, seduction. and everything, and the Prophet stayed firm. Right? The Prophet's message was essentially paradigm shifts. In other words, a total makeover. It was a revolutionizing communities. Right? And the prophets had to deal decisively not only with those direct communities that they were living within, but even the alliances forged with neighboring tribes and groupings around, so that sometimes, like they had the Confederates, the Battle of the Trench, people from all over tried to oppose them. And they were the small number inside, and these alliances were big and, blocks of groups and people. And very few of these prophets actually succeeded in their own lifetimes. They didn't have the kind of following that Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, as well as uh, the name slips me, the other person that we know, Yunus alayhi salam, that, when he left and 100,000 people accepted Islam after he was gone. So it was only those two that had big numbers of followings in their own lifetimes. Huh? And obviously, what did the prophets, how did they win? They were very patient. They had extreme fortitude and strength, divinely guided all the way. And essentially, it boiled down to monotheism and good actions. Right? And ultimate success of their missions was in the hands of Allah, and Allah changed the course of history in whichever way He deems fit. But He used the prophets as a means to try and save people. And if you look at this now, summary, the same challenges that the prophets faced those days and over the last 3,000-4,000 of years is the same issues we face right now, today, here and now. And it will be the same issues going forward as well. There'll still be crime, there'll still be corruption, there'll be people that got super egos, there'll be people that are extremely wealthy and stinking rich and the rest of it. And we'll have all those issues till today and forever. Right? Hence the relevance of the Quran with its universal messages set for all times. All right, let me end off with Surah Al-Asr, because this is the one surah we always used to end off with. Now, why I choose the surah is for there's two reasons given here. Why Imam Shafi, one of the great jurists of all times, he was known to have said that if only this particular short surah of 3 or 4 ayah was revealed of the Quran, then we as the Ummah have enough to go by for our salvation and success. Now, what a profound thing to say that this is like the summary of not only the Quran, but it's also the summary of all the prophets' messages, their risalat, the messages they came. And it was so good that when the Sahabas used to emulate this, they said, whenever Sahabas used to meet and when they used to separate and part company, the one used to read it to the other and remind the other that, what, although we've met today, we had a good meeting or we had a good meal together, whatever, but as we leave, remember that by time, all of mankind will be at a loss, except four types of people. The first one is always based on Iman, the faith. The monotheism is like the real pillar, right? Then it's not only something that you believe, which is the first part, you must follow the belief with good actions. In other words, deeds that show what you believe. Right? So there's like alignment between what your spiritual head and your heart is about, where you've got the belief there. Your deeds, your hands and your feet must show what those beliefs are. Right? So that's the two components. Then the third and fourth is also important, that you don't just keep this faith and good deeds to yourself or your small network of people that you mix with. You must take this thing a step further, because you're a soul society. You must do the following, that is, وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ, enjoin or encourage one another with what? With the truth, honesty, fair dealing, fair speech, whatever. In other words, do only what is good and right and the right thing to do at all times. And in doing so, you're going to be faced with challenges. There's going to be opposition. People will oppose you. They'll want to hit you. They'll want to put up a fictitious case against you and denigrate you and humiliate you. And then obviously, what must you do? You must tawasu bis-sabr. In other words, enjoying each other with perseverance and kindness and goodness. So you must encourage each other. In other words, this last two ayah is talking of being a social activist in not only in your societies, but in your families and your communities and in your nation states, wherever you are. This is what you must be doing. But it all starts, before you can preach to others, you must do the first two things, which is have Iman yourself and do the good deeds, as many as you can, and And even the beauty of this is salihat, which is the minimum of a plural. It's like a small plural. Do a few good deeds. You don't have to do everything, and you don't have to do it everything in a day also. You must do as much as you can on a daily basis, but improve from day to day. All right. So do a few good deeds today, do a few more tomorrow, and you'll see what that will, add up to will become an avalanche of good deeds, and you will then be a saved person. And, and obviously, they say charity starts at home and in small quantities. Do whatever you can. And sometimes, even if you don't have the wealth, they say even smiling at somebody is an act of charity. So start smiling at people. Be just good and kind to others, and don't only do that to Muslims. It's to humanity. It's not talking here about only be doing good to Muslims. It's talking about doing good to the rest of humanity. All right. So this is the Wal Asr, and I thought in the last slide, I just want to show you some other good books. If you want to read and you have the time, please do so. The famous Arabic word or the biography is called As-Sira an-Nabawiyya, and we always talk of Sira or the biography, the prophetic biography written by Ibn Hisham and also another biographer, famous Ibn Ishaq. This one is unfortunately not yet available in English. It runs into many volumes. This is one of the most comprehensive biographies of the Prophet. And then lower down we have Ibn Kathir's one as well, The Life of Prophet Muhammad. This one has been translated in 4 volumes in English. So you can see like these are the two like very authentic kind of sources from way back of scholars of the day. Then you have more present day people like Sheikh Yasir Qari from Memphis in the USA. He's done a brilliant seerah of the Prophet. He's publishing a book and he's got a series on the YouTube as well. Please go and look at it. This book by Martin Links, Muhammad, his life based on earlier sources, is also very good. This Hakel book is also very, very good. In the Footsteps of the Prophet by Tariq Ramadan, also very good writer. We all know Cat Stevens, Yusuf Islam. Ziauddin Sadr is also a very good author. Muhammad al-Ghazali as well. Shibli Nomani wrote a famous few-volume work on Siratun Nabi. So these are just works for people who want to read more and study more. But there's a lot out there. Please, take time, study the Quran, study the life of the Prophet. And you'll find sometimes the actual seerah of the Prophet is so embedded in the Quran that you enjoy the Quran more because you know the incident that it relates to in his life and what that ayahs are talking about in terms of that particular, the revelation was revealed for a specific purpose and in a context, and that's what you can get from by studying the Quran in more detail. Okay, so with that we'll end. I hope you enjoyed the course as much as I enjoyed researching and presenting it. I did learn a lot, and I hope you've done that as well. Also, I must admit that mistakes may have been made in these presentations, and I ask your forgiveness for that. And if there are any mistakes still that you find in the notes or in the recordings, please draw my attention to it, and we can rectify these. And we make this dua that may Allah make the Quran a source of continued guidance. May we become ambassadors, and may we also do this tafakkur and tadabbur, ponder and reflection on the Quran whenever we read, and let it have instill in us the khushu, the humility in our salah, so that our salah is also the mi'raj of the mu'min, so we can have our own mi'raj and ascend and transcend and go beyond us and, and enjoy salah and communication with Allah directly. Right, so may you accept all these humble efforts in your time and my time, and inshallah may we be rewarded. Right, so we'll end with Wal Asr. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Wal Asr, innal insana lafi khusr, illa alladhina amanu wa amilu s-salihat, wa tawasaw bil haqq, wa tawasaw bis sabr.